Dr. Gillian, let's look at the article entitled Large Scale Assessment of a Smartwatch to Identify Atrial Fibrillation. Why did someone think this would be a question worth asking?
Well, again, looking at atrial fibrillation as being the most common arrhythmia that we have, being that it affects a large number of people, suggesting that anywhere as many as 5 to 10 million Americans will have this at any one time.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people out there with atrial fibrillation. This was studied by Apple, and I'm not advocating Apple. There are many ways we can monitor our heart rhythm these days. One of my favorites is the Cardia EKG monitor, which we've seen on TV, where you can put your fingers on it and record 30 seconds of an ECG. And it can tell you whether you're in a regular rhythm, a fast rhythm, a slow rhythm, and so on and so forth. The same type of technology that Apple has incorporated in their watch. Mm-hmm. And what Apple did, the investigators, I should say, for Apple, was they took a lot of people, almost, well, not quite 500,000, but 400,000 people.
Yeah.
And which is why I chose this one, because if we start looking at people being participants in a study and everything and how you can look at things, they got 420,000 people to follow over 8 months. The difference that this has, as opposed to our previous article, is that the previous article had a device that will check any AFib that you might have. You don't have to have any symptoms. You can have anything at all, and you just check to see whether you have any atrial arrhythmias. There, it will find it. This, on the other hand, uses the watch. Now, to get a recording from this watch, you actually have to take your other hand and put on the watch, remain still to record the EKG. Now, it can record irregular heart rhythms and things like that, can alert you to maybe you should do this, but the only way to be certain that you actually have atrial fibrillation is to really record it. The catch is that a lot of people will have irregular heart rates. You have premature atrial or ventricular beats, your heart becomes irregular. And a lot of people will have that very difficult for, like, if you take your blood pressure machine, a lot of people will say this one was irregular, meaning that their heart rate was irregular and they couldn't record it. So we're attributing an irregular pulse rate necessarily being AFib, which may not be true.
Right. So they're not learning everything that's happening to this person's heart.
That's correct.
Entire time.
If it were, we wouldn't need to put the loops in. We just put these. We can tell everybody to buy this watch, which is still cheaper than what we're doing, but
yeah,
it doesn't work all the time.
Right. Okay. What they're looking for is something which could be dangerous and could not be dangerous.
Well, yeah. Again, AFib itself is not dangerous. You're not going to die from AFib. Where our intervention here in the study is that we're giving them a watch. Yeah. And we're having people to be aware to start looking for irregularities.
Right.
So once you have this watch, you're looking for irregularities, and you're going to be encouraged to send any of these in. And then they have a center that gets all of these reports in and looks at them to see, okay, is this AFib? Is this not AFib?
All right. So they did that. And I'm just looking at sort of the study design or the participants. I'm going all the way down to table 1. And I'm seeing that we've got significantly more males than females. We have a whole lot of people who are 40 to 54 and actually who are under 55. And only 5% are over 65. We have disproportionately white people, 38% obesity. It was not randomized. It's a very large group, but it doesn't necessarily reflect.
Right. It wasn't a randomized study at all. They just chose people who had to watch. So, yeah. And I tell people all the time, I said, right now that watch is what, $700.
Yeah.
So
it's not random.
If I told everybody, say, I want to enroll you in the study, but you got to buy this watch for $700. Even if I gave them the watch, now let's give that. For $700, a lot of people look at me and say, good luck with that one, buddy.
It's right.
So the advantage of this study is just what you pointed. It's just a bunch of people. It's a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
And hopefully by masses, you make up for any nuances between, white versus black, woman versus man, Hispanic versus Pacific Islander, for that matter. We're trying to say that we take this whole big group of people, maybe those numbers start to not matter so much. The first issue I get in studies like this is, and you pointed it out very nicely, if you start looking at the people over 65, we're looking at 5.9%.
Yeah.
Well, we're already saying that atrial fibrillation is something that grows more common as you get older. So the people most likely to have it is a smaller group. And then we're looking at like 22 to 39 years old, which is half the population in this study.
Right.
And they're probably the least likely to have AFib at all, which is, they weren't even included in the other study group. Remember, the other group, they didn't start looking at people till they were over 40. Totally different population. I think then when you look at a study like this, you gotta say, what exactly were they trying to do?
Yeah.
Other than sell Apple Watches, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say. So, I mean, one of their conclusions is the probability of receiving an irregular pulse notification was low. Well, they are using a very young, healthy population.
It's a little bit like me driving along rural South Carolina and said, what is the likelihood of me seeing an elephant crossing? It's possible.
Yeah.
If the circus comes in town, I might see it. But otherwise, it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to see a string of elephants run across me. And that's the one thing I don't have to worry about hitting with my car. You know, so when you ask for things that are very rare, you shouldn't be surprised when you don't see them.
Right. Some people were actually notified that they had some sort of regularity.
Well, the watch can actually sense.
I see.
Like the pulse beat. There's a photoelectric sense, so they can sense where, oh, your heart rate is irregular. Then you have to check it by, you actually have to do the EKG.
Okay.
To see whether the EKG actually was abnormal or not. If we look at, I guess this is table, the first one, 1912, that page.
Okay.
419,000 were included. 417,000 did not receive an irregular pulse notification. So it's like, whoa, you start with 420,000 and 417,000. So you're down to 2160 whoever got an irregular pulse notification at all. What, 2%?
2%, maybe something like that. Right. Yeah. The argument could be made if just something as simple as wearing a watch could identify even 2,000 people who could be notified and then get follow-up care and then be treated in some useful way. Is that what happens next? I mean, it looks like from even the 2,000.
1,216 never showed up for their first visit and were excluded. So now we're down to 945. 291 were excluded in that 945 because they either had urgent symptoms, previous atrial fibrillation, or flutter, which you haven't learned anything from it. So if you give it to somebody who already have AFib or flutter, they say, oh yeah, they also have it. You say, well, again, my daughter would look and say, duh, we did that already too. Really, another 208 excluded.
Yeah.
So we're really pushing ourselves down at the end, down to 254 completed in the service. We can argue about how well this is designed, about all those things, but you know, the big issue with this study was they demonstrated they can get a whole bunch of people in a study. Yes, very good. The population they were searching were unlikely to have the problem they were looking for.
Right.
And I will tell you right away, if I were the reviewer of this, there's no way in the world I would publish this article.
Oh, tell us why.
They had the wrong population. They eliminated most of the people, and they got a select group of people that they wanted to make conclusions on. And I think, you know, it's really difficult when you eliminate so many people that what you're getting is real information.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, how many times are you going to get false alarm before you get there? Because at the end of this thing, if you look at AFib on subsequent, but when they already have it, they started out over a median monitoring of 117 days. They said irregular pulse were by 2161 participants, 0.52%.
Yeah.
So that's how many people that even had an irregular heart rhythm noted. 3.1 of 65 years or older. So all of a sudden you're looking at, you know, a group of people that were likely to have it. And then when you start cutting it down, you start realizing that 50% released the notification by day 38. We've taken this huge number and we've carved it down to a small population of people. Do we even believe any of the data?
Yeah. I must say this figure 1 is a little misleading to me because they keep using these statistics that are, so it's, 68.4%. We've got 82.7% completed the 90-day survey. That's not of the total.
That's not of the total. See,
nothing even close to that. So
this is not the intention to treat.
Right.
This is one of those, we're going to get the group that had the best numbers.
Yeah.
And then we're going to carve that in to tell you the data that we want you to hear.
Right.
They didn't target anybody. They just got everybody to watch. Okay. The second thing that was a problem I have with it is that you start looking at what they call positive predictive values. What did you really learn? And look at 1913. Mm-hmm. They start off with positive predictive values. These are the ones that they actually submitted. So they were roughly a little bit under 7,000 tachograms, which basically means these are events they look for adjudication. Yeah. They threw out 270 of them because they weren't quality to be read. 2089 were irregular parents who received notification. Almost 1,500 showed simultaneous atrial fibrillation on ECG patch monitoring. So they're saying that it's still 0.71. They manipulated the numbers so much that I would question anything they told me. Yeah. As far as being helpful for me as an individual.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'm looking at this right before that last paragraph. It says, of the 86 participants who had irregular pulse notifications during simultaneous use of any, so now we're down to 86. 72 showed evidence of AFib. This resulted in a positive predictive value for irregular pulse of 0.84. I just don't, I guess I don't.
Only of those who had an irregular pulse thing. So it's like, so if you chose the people who had irregular pulses notified, only 0.84 are of those had atrial fibrillation.
All right. So Apple spent a lot of money to show us that they can gather a lot of data. From your perspective as a practitioner and as a researcher, they're not telling you anything that's particularly useful. I mean, are there takeaway lessons about these kinds of at least potential mass-produced large studies?
I think the reason I included this was not because I wanted to jump on top of a study that I don't think was that great, which I still don't think is that great, even though it's in the New England Journal of Medicine.
I see that.
That's I mean, this is a high level. We're in this moment where we're evolving how we do research. Mm-hmm. There's two things I walk away with. I said, when you start reading the study, the discussion, go with the title. Do they support each other? Does it really make sense? Did you walk away learning anything you didn't already know? It's okay to confirm a study, but if somebody does something that's just, hey, this is obvious, we need to know. It costs money to do research. It costs time and people, it costs time and effort, and it ends up costing time and paper when you print this. So at the end of this, if you don't have anything worthwhile to write, maybe you shouldn't write it in the first place, regardless of who funds you're going out to get this. Of the 420,000 people they did, if you look at the end of study survey, which is table 2, what did they find out? New diagnosis, AFib, they had 404 people. There were 7 strokes during the whole study. You're following 420,000 people. I'm unimpressed. What you're saying, you're going to make people use this watch, be aware of this watch, and say, at the end of the day, is it going to help you or hurt you? Because you pointed out very much that there's some degree of aggravation. If you're running around all day worrying where you have AFib, you're looking at your watch all day, your life in doing things other than looking at your watch starts to take a real dive down. There's not necessarily a medical problem identified as the reason to get into the study. We took a bunch of people with watches. Well, the trouble with taking a bunch of people with watches is there's some people who already have AFib. Bad data is worse than no data sometimes.
Why do you think this was published?
I think the novelty of the study when it came out was one thing. Apple ain't exactly somebody that people like to tick off a little bit. So I think the name carried a little bit into it. And I think there are people who looked at this that was thinking that said, this is something we want to get people interested in doing. People did something that was pretty exciting. They got 420,000 people to participate in the study. They had to sign a form to be in the study. It wasn't like you weren't just anybody with a watch. On the positive side, is intriguing because what we really, 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 really want is for people to live their life without us interfering And then we are able to glean some information from everything they do so that I can predict who's going to have a problem before they have the problem. I mean, if we could do that, then, you know, we're sort of in the Jetsons age. You know, we can go in the little thing, put our arms out, and they say, "Hey, doc, you know, you're doing okay, but you know, your shoulder over here, you probably have a little arthritis there. You may need something about it next week or next year."
Yeah.
We're not there yet. And this study to me shows that there's still things that we do not get out of this study, even as big as it is.
Yeah.
And it wasn't supervised. People are doing this study for other issues now because people are saying, like, for instance, I've worked on a study that looked at using earbuds, and earbuds can also be used to record EKGs and stuff like that. If we can get people who are wearing earbuds, that we may be able to see more exactly whether they have AFib. The cardia group, they're actually advertising on TV a lot about getting your EKG almost on a daily basis, that you can check and see whether you have AFib or not, or if you have symptoms, to check and see if you have AFib. And we're telling people, you have control. You can look for things. Right. You can look for blood pressure readings. Do you do it? Do you check your weights? And this is one of the first things we can check, not just your pulse oximeter, which is a really nice thing. Mm-hmm. You can check your glucose, which is a good thing, but you can actually check your heart rhythm, which 15 years ago, people would say, you can't do that without going to the doctor's office. And I think this study probably got published is that there's a part of people who would like to believe that this can start people looking at how do you incorporate what you're going to do every day into something that may ultimately be good for your health long term.
It taps into that sense of patient empowerment. Whether it answers questions that patients actually need answered, that's another question. So,
and that's exactly right. That's another question.
All right. This has been so interesting. I'm really excited about our upcoming conversation. I'm just so grateful for your time.
It's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.